Okay, all right. Well, thanks for hitting play on the button there. We're going to do a short conversation here with a good friend of mine, Ken Braun, who is a senior investigative researcher at the Capital Research Center, where I am a senior fellow, in addition to being a co-editor of the Giving Review. Ken has worked at several free market think tanks and written columns and op-eds for years, maybe approaching decades, Ken, about politics and policy. Uh, he once served on the staff of a Michigan legislator, I think, state legislator. Uh, and as loyal readers of the Giving Review know, we have tried to pay close attention to the situation about homelessness in Los Angeles, which is a large and growing problem. Ken has spoken to Elizabeth Mitchell, with whom we had a conversation recently about this problem and the role of philanthropy in it. So we wanted to see if we could get him on to talk a little bit about him, Ken, and that problem. Well, first, then you, Ken. How long have you been at CRC?
About 2.5 years. And I was a contractor for about 6 months before that. It kind of took me on a rent-to-own basis and decided to keep me. So,
and what does a senior investigative researcher do?
most of what I do is I work for our Influence Watch website on the one side, and our magazine, your aforementioned CRC magazine, on the other. I do a lot of keeping an eye on the intersection of philanthropy, your issue here, and how it impacts public policy and politics. And I also write, like I said, for our Influence Watch website, I do a lot of the more complicated complex profiles on that issue, and also some of the historical things. I just finished one not posted yet on the Black Panther Party back in the 60s. I've done the Weather Underground. I did the one on President Clinton himself, finished one on the Trump-Russia collusion issue. These are, kind of big substantive things. A lot of our profiles on Influence Watch are in the 500 to 2,000 word range. Mine tend to roll a little larger than that because the issues are meatier.
Well, let's go to the meaty issue then of homelessness in Los Angeles.
Sure.
Is that problem, social challenge, bigger in that city than elsewhere, by your understanding?
Very likely it is in Los Angeles, because it is in California generally. California's got 12, 13% of the nation's population. It's got somewhere between federal estimates 25 to 28% of the nation's homeless population, and an even larger percentage, or an even larger proportion of the the people who literally don't have a roof over their head population. So it's a big problem in California, maybe worse than anywhere else in the nation, and LA in particular, probably for a lot of reasons. Even it's a problem in San Francisco, it's a problem in Los Angeles. I mean, one particular part of Los Angeles, Venice Beach, has 40,000 residents. They've got 1,600 homeless people in this very affluent beach community of 40,000 residents. I mean, if you extrapolate that ratio onto the whole nation, you got 13 million homeless people. It's like the entire state of Illinois. So it is, by most measures that you can find, a bigger problem in California, and likely Los Angeles proper as well.
So the Giving Review, my colleague Bill Chamber, whom I know has written about the role of philanthropy in this problem. Is he right? What has philanthropy done to either create or exacerbate this challenge?
Yeah, so I think the big thing to get at here is that California is a one-party state. We see with Governor Cuomo in New York that there's a problem there, where a one-party state can just get, where one party's pretty much been running the state for a while, they can get away with more things. And I think the philanthropic sector gets into that as well. If you're, the politicians are far more likely to listen to the philanthropic sector's concerns, and if it's a left-leaning philanthropic sector, they're gonna march to those orders. And I think that's a lot of what's happening in California. They're putting out this idea that you're somehow criminalizing the homeless population if you take the 200 people who are living in tents on a half-mile stretch of Venice Beach where the homes cost like $2 million on average. If you move them from there over to a homeless shelter or a hotel or a substance abuse or wherever else you send them, you're somehow criminalizing the homeless population. And that's what's, coming out in some of the philanthropic sector there. In another city that's kind of got more competitive politics, the local politicians are going to push back if, your local community foundation is trying to allow a homeless encampment to set up in the prime real estate of your city. That's just not going to be accepted. Somehow in Los Angeles, it becomes criminalizing the problem. So I do think, just because of the nature of California's politics, that the foundations of a very kind of left-leaning bent they got they got a lot more muscle than they do in a city where there's some pushback to them.
Is it possible to name any of those particular foundations?
Sure. For example, there was the LA County Sheriff Villanueva has been kind of trying to push back in the way that I was just describing, and getting accused of criminalizing the homeless because he wants to move them off the beach. An organization called the Venice Community Housing Corporation, I think, attacked him for the forced displacement and criminalization of homelessness. That Venice Community Housing is supported in large measure hundreds of thousands of dollar donations from operations like the California Community Foundation, the Annenberg Foundation, the Liberty Hill Foundation. First two are multi-billion-dollar endowed California left-leaning foundations, big donors to a lot of left-leaning operations. The third one, Liberty Hill, is the mayor's wife, Mayor Garcetti's wife, was or is probably maybe still on the board of the Liberty Hill Foundation. So, those are three right there that, and their names show up in other places, but, in other left-leaning causes. But yeah, there's three names for you right there.
And the funding by those and other, I'll say liberal, maybe progressive foundations, pays for what? I mean, one would think studies, lawsuits. What form is the grant making actually taking?
Well, in this case, the Venice Community Housing Coalition, the corporation. I mean, Venice Community. What is this organization? This is a neighborhood. Like I said, they have $2 million homes in this area. The average home price in the United States is $300,000. If you could have ever literally afforded the rent or a mortgage or to own a home or a residence rather in Venice, then you probably have the financial wherewithal to pretty much retire comfortably in just about everywhere east from Venice all the way to the eastern seaboard, right? So who is Venice Community Housing? I mean, they're supporting a homeless population bigger than the city in a town that probably, these are not indigenous homeless people. And I've got some fun statements made by some of them to major newspapers to show it. So these organizations are propping up, Venice Community Housing Corporation probably most cities would be doing the things for the homeless that need to be done for them. In Venice, they can afford to do things like scream criminalization when you try and move them off of the beach and the other real estate into probably places where they need to go for their own good.
They didn't ask you your advice, but I will, and you started to give it there. But what would have been a better way for this largesse to have been distributed if you want to help solve the problem of homelessness? What's a better way to go about thinking?
So they did begin finally moving the folks off of the Venice beach and into local hotels, and in some cases, I mean, one woman who said she just enjoyed living on the beach. They moved her at one point into a homeless shelter. I don't know if that was criminalized or not. She didn't like the homeless shelter, neither did her dog, so she moved back to the beach. She likes the hotel they moved her into, but if they try and move her into another community somewhere, she says she's going right back to the beach. I mean, these are not things that, moving these folks into other places where they might be able to either, the folks that have mental illnesses, substance abuse problems need to go places where they can be treated. The folks, they need to be moved off the beach. The folks with, income problems, if they're homeless because they literally can't afford a house, move them off the beach, move them into a community where they can, be able to afford that or get a job rather, and more easily get a job. And so Los Angeles, to show the wrong way of doing it, Los Angeles taxpayers approved a couple of years ago a bond measure, multi-billion-dollar bond measure, to build housing for these residences for these folks. NBC affiliate in Los Angeles does an investigative report, finds out that it's costing average $500,000 or more per residence for these things. Some of them as high as more than 700,000, excuse me, yeah, $500,000 or more, $500,000 or more. Some of them more than 700,000, close to $750,000, which the television station noted is, what people pay for, small high-end condos in downtown Los Angeles. So they're finding ways to do it wrong. And just this whole notion that you're criminalizing the issue by moving these folks from places where they shouldn't be as a matter of law, and they shouldn't be as a matter of their own good, to places where both of these things are better. I mean, there's one guy that's living not on the beach in Venice. He lives off the beach. He built himself a 2-story plywood structure in Venice, right? Community with $2 million homes. I mean, the only places in California where it seems people get in trouble for trying to build a house is when they try and pay for it. Otherwise, it's criminalizing it to move them out. So I think there's multiple layers of bad policy going on here, and it's supported, like we were discussing. It's cheered on not just by the politicians, but by some of these foundations that got some muscles to flex there.
So if I'm a progressive grant maker in Los Angeles, hypothetically, is the problem the grant making tactics, or is it the progressivism itself? Is it possible for progressive grant makers to do good things in the homeless, or would I be able to get you after 6 years to compliment some progressive grant making on the homelessness issue, either in LA or elsewhere?
I'm sure that there are places where it is done well, and like I said, and in places where there's a pushback, they're not going to be able to do. I mean, anybody that has single side control of things is going to abuse that power, and I think that's what's happening in Los Angeles. For example, the San Francisco District Attorney, Chesa Boudin, I think is how you pronounce his name, and a Los Angeles state senator who represents Los Angeles. They did a joint editorial a couple of weeks ago, or maybe it was this week, trying to lay out exactly what the problem is in the community. And they said, well, with the homeless issue, and they said, well, that, they made good points from the standpoint of saying we haven't done enough with mental health. A lot of these folks have mental health issues. They have substance abuse issues. We haven't spent enough money helping these things. Well, okay, that's true, likely, as far as it goes. And in a lot of communities, foundations spend bucks to help that, both left and right and center. But whose fault is that when it's not being done in California? I mean, there's been one side in charge of the state for decades. Maybe you should have spent more money on psychiatric wards rather than bullet trains and solar panels and the things that California. This is the most, the biggest state budget, I believe, in the country. It's one of the highest tax burdens in the country. It's been like that for decades, and more than, it's been a single party state for decades. And now they've got this huge problem, which is clearly worse than the rest of the nation. And they're going back to solutions they should have thought of a long time ago, and coming up with excuses, criminalization, that is going to make the problem worse. It clearly has.
So if there are lessons to be drawn from single party control in the political context, or in the philanthropic context, I guess, the monoculturalism of establishment philanthropy, those lessons could be applied in other contexts as well. I assume you would agree.
Oh yeah, I'm not gonna say that one party is got their hands clean on this. That's certainly, I think if you left a Republicans in charge of a state, there are fewer examples of that, I might note. But if you did for long enough, you're going to end up with the same, not the same. You're going to end up with similar problems on different issues probably, but you're going to end up with that. I mean, the $500,000 homeless residents situation is probably, I didn't look deeply into it, but there's probably a whole lot of if not literal graft and corruption going on, at least a soft legal version of it where people are getting paid a whole lot more to build these things than they should. And that's kind of endemic to any place where there's not a lot of accountability in the political system.
And in the philanthropic context, as numbers you've helped compile show, there's really no chance at all of a conservative philanthropic monoculture. And
oh, no.
you might be seeing the ramifications of that on this.
Right. Yeah. And so, and I guess it would be more difficult for a philanthropic culture to kind of a right-wing variety to kind of go this wild, even in a state, say Utah, that is totally, more or less a single Republican state. There's the philanthropic infrastructure wouldn't arrive to exacerbate the problem. So yeah, California's, a perfect storm of a lot of bad ideas. And I think those are two reasons why.
How are the Michigan State Spartans going to do in football this year?
I am guardedly optimistic, but it's hard to know because this transfer portal thing has led to lots of players leaving and lots of players coming in, and the guys that have come in seem to be on basis a little better than the ones leaving. So it's like, a brand new team has been dropped on me and I don't really know what I'm going to see. So,
but as a data-driven expert analyst, what's your prediction of their record?
I will say, so people are saying we should be optimistic, happy if they win 6. I will, go 6-6 and scoot into a bowl game. I think they could top a little higher than that, but that's probably a safe guess.
All right. Well, Ken Braun, thanks so much for joining the Giving Review for this conversation. We totally appreciate it. Thank you.
Love to be here, Michael, anytime.